But the problem is somehow all this ideation and innovation is not creating impact. We are not seeing business results. As a result, people lose faith in innovation. They're saying, what's the point of all this effort if at the end of the day we are not seeing more sales, we are not seeing more profits, etc. So we just try to. So what we try to address in our book is how do you address these three problems? How do you address the pipeline problem? How do you address the velocity problem? And how do you address the batting average problem? So what I'm going to present to you now is what did we find are the solutions to these three challenges that organizations face. So I'm going to start by talking about the pipeline challenge. Remember what the pipeline challenge is, right? The pipeline challenge is there's not enough flow of ideas in the organization. So what most organizations have found is that people have ideas. It's not as though they don't have ideas, but somehow there's no way of capturing them. There's no way of making people feel that the organization is interested in their ideas. So that's why one best practice which has evolved over time among companies that are good at innovation is they make it easy for employees to share their ideas. In other words, they set up what is called an idea management system. They say, okay, let's not make it hard for employees who have ideas, let's make it easy for them to share their ideas with the organization. So we found that a lot of companies have started not only putting these idea management systems in place, but also tracking the ideas, seeing what happens to the ideas over time. And this gives a lot more momentum to participation in the entire innovation process. When we looked at good idea management systems, we found that there were 6 important things they needed to cover. They needed to be clear about the source of ideas. Remember, there could be many sources of ideas, right? Who all could be the sources of ideas? Employees, suppliers, customers. In fact, almost every stakeholder could potentially be a source. So you need to be clear about who is the source you're collecting ideas from. You need to be clear about the scope. Some idea management systems just focus on very small incremental ideas, more like improvements. Others are focused on breakthrough ideas. Now, if you try to collect all of these in the same system, it may not work too well. Because remember, the review processes, the kind of investments involved are all very different. And you also need to be clear about how many stages through which the idea will go before it's approved and put into practice. Another important thing we found, in fact, probably the most important thing, is transparency in selection criteria. Why is transparency in selection criteria of the ideas important? For a very basic reason, and that's particularly, I think, relevant to the forum in which we are meeting now, the National NHRD Forum, which is basically that if people give ideas and they don't know on what basis the ideas are being selected, then they're likely to attribute selection to a whole lot of other factors, politics, favoritism, a whole lot of things, and they'll soon get demotivated and they won't share their ideas with the organization anymore. So in fact, if I were to choose among these 6, I would say that having transparency in selection may well be the most important thing you need to take care of in your idea management system. And last but not the least is funding. If you don't have some resources available to try out the ideas, you're soon again going to find that the ideas start drying up, because people want to be able to experiment, demonstrate, show that their ideas work. So good companies, and for example, we did a study with Cognizant when we were writing this book, and what we found is they actually track ideas very closely. For example, you can see between financial years 08 and 12, the number of ideas went up to more than 130,000. And the more interesting part is 37% of Cognizant employees were participating in this process, with about 14% of the ideas getting implemented in the organization. So this is what happens when you have a good idea management system in place. Another important part of getting people involved in innovation is creating excitement. A lot of people think that innovation is not part of my job. Why should I innovate? I just came here to do a routine job, now they're expecting me to come up with all these ideas. So one thing that helps is if you can create what we call buzz. When you create some excitement in the organization to get people involved in the innovation process. One company which seems to do this buzz creation very well has its head office just across the road, across from the Leela, Titan. And what Titan does is, almost every year, they run an innovation campaign around some theme. For example, one of the themes that was very successful was something called simplify and automate. What was the objective of simplify and automate? It was actually very simple. Titan's biggest business today is actually jewelry, not watches as we often think. Jewelry is their biggest business. But jewelry is a notoriously labor-intensive activity. So what Titan has been struggling with is how do we increase production without needing to train more and more people to make jewelry. And that training is also not easy. So what they did was they launched this campaign where they asked their employees, can you find ways in which we can simplify the jewelry manufacturing process and also automate it? Because if we can do both of these together, we can improve productivity manifold, which won Titan the Tata Innovista Award for the Best Innovation of the Year and also got them a US patent. And what this does is very simple. Essentially, when a complex piece of jewelry is being made, box of precious stones with something like a forceps in hand, magnifying glass on the eye, and they will actually pick out the stones individually to see how to fit them into that particular jewelry. So you can imagine, right, this is a very time-consuming process. For the first time, Titan came up with a robot which could do this whole thing. And as you could imagine, that really automated the whole process. And this is one of the innovations which came out of this particular campaign. So you can see here, what is the advantage of this campaign? One is, of course, the excitement. The second is creating focus. Because what sometimes happens when you set up an idea management system is you get ideas about a whole manner of things. In fact, I often joke, the thing about which you first get a lot of ideas is how to improve food in the company canteen. Or, how do you improve the transportation arrangements for people to come to work. I'm not saying those are bad things, but those don't immediately, add value to the company's business. What happens when you choose a campaign like this is you're clearly telling people this is the priority. If you come up with an idea on this, the organization is ready to implement it because we really want these particular results. A third dimension, which is also very important right at the starting of the whole innovation journey, is training and development. Again, very relevant to the NHRD network. Some people believe that maybe training is not required for innovation. You're either born with it or you're not born with it. But that doesn't seem to be quite true, because what people have found is that almost everyone has some amount of creative skills. The only difference is how do you use those creative skills. Maybe somebody is good at cooking, somebody likes painting, somebody else likes music. But if you can train them, they can actually orient these creative skills towards business problem solving. And that's what a lot of these techniques are doing. Whether you look at design thinking, systems thinking, lateral thinking, these are helping people put on a creative problem solving hat and apply their creativity to solve problems that are relevant to the organization. So just going back to Titan again, one interesting goal they set was that by this year, by 2015, and this is something they set about 5 or 6 years ago, they wanted everyone in the organization to be an innovator. What they meant by that was they wanted everyone to be trained in how to use these creative problem solving methods and to do innovation more effectively. So these are some of the very basic things you need to put in place for innovation to happen. Now, one question which immediately comes up the moment you start a big innovation program is, what kind of problems should I try to solve? After all, if you look at any organization, there are so many possible problems you could address. So which one do you pick up? Where is innovation really going to make a difference? So we found in our research that there are 3 things which seem to help you identify what is a good problem to solve. And we have a very simple way of remembering this. We call it pain, wave and waste. Wherever you see pain, wave and waste, that's probably a right problem where innovation is really going to make a big impact. Just to give you an example, many of you might know that Bajaj was a relatively late entrant in the motorcycle business, traditionally a scooter company. Of course, ironically, today is exactly the opposite problem it's facing, but that's not something I'll talk about right now. But if you look at Bajaj, a lot of their early motorcycle launches didn't get anywhere. In fact, till early 2000s, they were pretty much also ran in the motorcycle business. Their first successful bike was this bike called Pulsar. And even today, it's the mainstay of Bajaj's motorcycle business. So if you look at why Pulsar was successful, you'll see that this pain wave waste had a huge role to play. First is the pain point. What was the pain point that Pulsar addressed? Very simple pain point. People who were tired of the existing bikes in the market. The biggest selling bike in India at that time was something called Splendor from Hero Honda. The Splendor is a great bike if what you want is good mileage and low cost of ownership, but it's not the most exciting bike in the world. And what Bajaj found was there were a whole new generation of bike riders who wanted something more. They wanted to make a style statement, they wanted more power, they wanted a bike they could enjoy using on the weekend. And this is the pain point that Pulsar addressed. But what was equally important is that there was a wave. What is this wave? What is happening around the early 2000s in India? What are the big changes that were happening? Like, the industry was growing, the software industry was just picking up, BPO was just getting to start. A few years later, retail became a major industry. So for the first time, you had a huge mass of people, young men generally, with a lot of money in their pocket. If not money in their pocket, a powerful pay slip which could give them a loan. Many of them were staying miles away from home. Very important, because that meant that the bike purchase decision, their dads and other people were not involved in this. It's a decision they took themselves. So this was an important trend which allowed a sizable market for the Pulsar. And there was also a waste issue. What was the waste issue? The easiest way of making a more powerful bike is to put a bigger engine. But the moment you put in a bigger engine, you're going to also consume more fuel. And the customer for Pulsar is interesting. He wants all that experience, power, style, but he doesn't want to spend too much more money on fuel. That's the other side of the story. So this is where the technological innovation of Bajaj came in. They came up with this digital twin spark ignition technology. Again, not a revolutionary new thing. Twin spark engines already existed, but largely in bigger engines. What Bajaj did is they managed to create it in 150 and 175cc engines, so they were able to downsize this technology, and that's what allowed them to give you more power without actually increasing the consumption of fuel. Okay, the third step, remember we are right now trying to address the pipeline problem. We're trying to see how do you get more ideas. And what we found was that the biggest challenge is building participation. Why is participation important? Because what's the best way of getting more ideas? Tap into more people in your organization, right? Why should innovation be the activity only of the marketing department or the R&D? Why can't it be something that everybody does? I mean, that's really the philosophy. And things like open source movement have shown that it's really possible to democratize innovation, make innovation a much more inclusive activity. So one of the big questions in any organization is how do you build participation? So we found that there were 4 important things that many companies did to build participation. The first thing they did was they found good role models. If you want people to be involved in innovation, you've got to have people in the organization who others look up to involved in the innovation process. And one of the interesting things we kept grappling with is, what should this role model be like? Who should this role model be? And we just explored that a little further, again, thinking of cricket. Should it be somebody who is like a Sachin Tendulkar? Or should it be somebody who is like a Rahul Dravid? Well, you might think it's an interesting question, right? Because Sachin is clearly a very stylish player, very creative. Rahul Dravid at first sight doesn't seem like the most creative guy, but there's an important difference between the two. If I ask somebody, can you be like Sachin? They will say, yeah, I would love to be like Sachin, but maybe I can't. Sachin almost looks as though he was a genius. Almost looks as though he was born with cricket in his blood. Whereas here is a guy like Rahul Dravid who over his career recreated himself several times. He was first a test batsman. People said he can't play one day, then he became a one-day player. People said Rahul Dravid T20, you must be crazy. By the end of his career, he was even playing T20. Here's a guy who looks very ordinary. People can actually relate to him. They say, yeah, maybe I can be like him. I can actually slowly, improve my game. So maybe you need role models like that. You need ordinary people who have done extraordinary things. They are probably better role models than trying to choose geniuses and mavericks who people don't really think they can emulate. Another important practice to drive participation is creating what we call communities of practice. This is something that Mindtree has done very well. What's important about a community of practice? A community of practice is a group of people who come together pretty much voluntarily to work on something which is of common interest to them. Why is this important? Because remember, they have come together not because the company mandated them or their boss mandated them, but because they had a common interest. So these communities of practice can be extremely powerful sources of ideas and innovation. And all Mindtree does is set some criteria saying if you want to form a community of practice, you need to have so many people, you need to have so many activities, but beyond that the company is willing to endorse and encourage and support such communities. Another interesting method we saw in building participation is something that Cognizant does. What Cognizant found is that managers and people to whom people report play a crucial role in supporting innovation. Why? Suppose that one of the members of the team comes up with an idea. He or she doesn't know what to do with that idea. So what do? They go to the manager and they say, I have this idea, can you help me? What does the manager say? If the manager is not very clear about it, he doesn't really know how to respond to this idea. So what Cognizant did was they trained all their managers in how to be innovation catalysts. If someone comes to you with an idea, what should you do? How do you help that person take the idea forward? How do you introduce that person to somebody else in the organization who can help build on that idea? How do you get funding? Who could be a possible champion? These are the kind of things which managers have now been trained to do to help support the innovation process. And last but not the least, and of course we could have particularly under the NHRD umbrella, we could have a whole day seminar on rewards and recognition related to innovation. But actually there's only one key thing. The key thing seems to be that most creative people are actually looking for recognition, acknowledgement, rather than huge monetary rewards. If you can consistently